This is a 1989 Ford Festiva, and it's probably one of the coolest little cars you've never heard of. I've borrowed this car from myself, the $1,000 car guy. You may have seen me in other episodes such as this. The Ford Festiva was a merger between Ford, Mazda, and Kia. Back in the late 80s, Ford knew that they needed to have something that could compete with their import friends. The Mustangs and the Tempos of the world were struggling to be able to reach at least 25 miles per gallon. Ford knew that they had nothing that could possibly compete with it, so they reached out to Mazda. Mazda, partnering with Kia, allowed them to come up with this. The rest of the world refers to this car as a Mazda 121, or a Kia Pride. The only thing Ford on this is basically the emblems. The major benefit was that a smaller producer, Kia, could now import cars into the United States and sell to millions of people. This Mazda-designed 1.3-liter carbureted naturally aspirated motor makes around 58 horsepower and 75 foot-pounds of torque. Now that may not seem like a lot, but given the car's relatively small size and low vehicle curb weight of around 1,700 pounds, it scoots this car along just plenty. But it's definitely not fast. From everywhere that I've seen, there's only one spot that gives away that this car was made in another country, and that's directly on the firewall with a little tiny sticker that says Made in Korea. Almost everything about this car is proportionately small, whether it be the factory 12-inch rims and tires, small mirrors, or optional rear wiper. Almost everything on this car is smaller than normal. This Festiva happens to be the LX package, which is amazing for a Festiva. You have to understand, back in the day when these cars came out, they were around $3,000 for the low-end model and $4,000 for a high-end model. And you have to understand, getting an option like AC for over $500 was a huge increase in the price. Very fortunate for me though, this car does have AC. Next we're going to go over some of the quirks and features of this little hatchback, starting with the key, which is tremendously small. It's definitely the smallest key I've ever had of any car ever. Back in the 70s and 80s, people were worried about their fuel being stolen, so a lot of manufacturers had lockable gas caps. This car went a little step further and had a lockable fuel filler door lid. If this car happened to be an L package, which is the lower trim level, it would have vinyl seats, which at this point in its life would be completely destroyed. It's made of the same material that the door panels are made of. If you look closely, you'll be able to see some of these cracks from wearing. That's what all of the seats look like if it was an L package. This car is the highest trim level of a Festiva I've ever owned, of which I've had 7 now. By being the higher trim package, you actually get the nice comfortable door handle along with the map pocket. And yes, even the highest trim level still has roll-up manual windows. Inside is no different than the outside. A mostly Spartan interior designed for not so much comfort but efficiency. This car, being a later model year, has the optional 5-speed transmission. Funny thing though, 5th gear and 4th gear in the 4-speed transmission have the same output drive. The factory radio from 1989 leaves a lot to be desired, but it does still function, so I'd like to keep it if I can. This small cup holder was added by the original owner, but I'll be removing it. Having a tachometer in a Ford Festiva is actually optional. You'd think you'd need to know it, but I guess you're just supposed to drive by sound. Continuing with the small theme of the car, the vents are extremely small. It should be noted that most Festivas do not have the optional passenger side mirror. Every other one of my Festivas did not come with it. I believe the theory was that if you're driving a Ford Festiva in the US, you're going to be in the right slow lane, so you won't need to see who's trying to pass you. Let's start with some of this car's rare options. Down here, on the left side of the driver, you'll find this switch. That's actually for power mirrors. I've never once seen that on a Festiva. Because this was a northern car, it has both rear defrost and rear wiper blade. But not only that, it comes with a rear washer fluid nozzle. Again, something I've never seen on a Festiva. And you may be asking yourself, does that mean that there's a hose that's run all the way from the front of the engine bay to the rear of the trunk? No. Actually, you lift up the rear tailgate and you'll find an area where you can fill up an additional reservoir for the rear washer fluid. Continuing with the rare options that this car has, it has a rear trunk lid cover, which allows you to hide anything that you don't want seen in the back of your vehicle. I know it's just a piece of wood with some fabric on it, but Festiva people go nuts for this. Something I never saw in any of my other Festivas is this rare 50-50 split rear seat. In case you didn't have something that was very big, you could only do a portion of it, I guess. Another fun fact about Festivas is they are extremely large on the inside. This is due in part to the extremely thin body panels and the fact that in the late 80s, we didn't have airbags and other safety measures. By moving the front seats slightly forward and removing the rear deck lid, you could then lift up the rear seat completely and push it forward, now giving you a tremendous amount of rear cargo room. Another interesting quirk about the Festiva is the fact that it uses a 1-inch exhaust tubing all the way up to the front header. Again, proving that these cars were made for efficiency, not for speed. Andrew, you keep going on about efficiency for fuel, but you're not telling us what the numbers are. In previous carbureted versions of these cars that I've had, I've been able to get in upwards of 50 miles per gallon. Now that also means going around 50 miles per hour on the highway. In town, I would easily average over 40 miles per gallon. You put that in today's standards, most modern cars can't even compete with that. Another interesting feature about the Festiva is the fact that the rear seats coupled with the front seats can turn it into a bed. What I mean by that is, if you remove the hook latches in the rear trunk area for the seat, the back seat folds completely down. Then, typically you would remove the headrest, fold your seat completely flat and far forward, and suddenly you can basically go camping in your Festiva. Luckily, I've never had to do that. Another item that dates this car is this. These, my younger generation, are called Fusible Links, and this is what you would use in place of a fuse. The idea is, if one of these wires would split in half, that would save your engine. Let me give you a little example. On my very first Festiva, you see how these terminals aren't labeled too well for positive and negative? Because it's like black wire, black wire. There is a little identification here, but depending on how old the battery is, it may be on its side or somewhere else. I ended up hooking up some jumper leads to the wrong sides. Now, if you did that in a modern car, depending on which one, you may be frying your ECU when you go to start it. All it did on my car was blow up one of these main fusible links. Put the new one in, good to go. Having older technology saved me. Now, fuel efficiency on these cars isn't everything. It is great to be able to say you get 40 miles per gallon, but at the cost of, if you're in a collision with a modern vehicle, you will probably not survive depending on the severity of the accident. So it's something to keep in mind if you're looking to purchase one of these old Festivas. Another interesting feature that this car has is the rare under seat tray. You see, underneath the seat, there's a plastic tub that you can take out. And the idea was, if you were going camping or fishing or something outdoorsies or to a party, you could load this tray with ice packs and then put your beers or sodas inside of it. Ford knew that they were going to have some real party animals on their hands with this car. My intentions with this car are to basically just enjoy it for what it is. I'd like to remove anything aftermarket that was put in, along with that cup holder, and basically return the car back to its original glory. Another interesting quirk and feature is the fact that this does have an antenna for the radio, but it's not power. If you wanted to get better reception, you reach out and pull it out. Like a little RC car. These were pretty simple cars, so that basically covers up all the little quirks and features. Now it's time to take it out on the road and see how it drives. So we're out driving the Ford Festiva. It should be known that I've driven one of these for at least 5 years combined in my life. Whether that be from my very first one, which was carbureted, to one of my most recent ones, which actually has a turbo 5.3 LS. If you're interested in seeing anything about that, I'll put a link in the description below, so you can go ahead and check it out for yourself. Driving this car is just like anything else, except it doesn't have power steering. It doesn't have any additional driving features. Basically, you're driving it off of smell and the way everything sounds. I definitely have a biased opinion on these cars because I've had so many and I love them so much. You can't have something this simple and not like it. If you have to work on your own car, it's easy. Everything is easily accessible and you can still buy parts for it to this day. My plans for this car are to basically drive it and keep it exactly how it is. This one doesn't have the best brakes, as you can probably hear. 0 to 60 time is somewhere in like the 10 to 12 second mark, so you're not going to win any races. If you're wondering what driving something like this feels like, imagine you're in a fully enclosed golf cart. It has very good low-end torque. You can spin the tires easily in first gear, but then it'll drop off immediately in power. As far as practicality goes, this car has ample amounts of space. You can easily fit 4 adult-sized people in this car. And by adult, I mean American-sized people. Large. As far as hauling things, with all that extra room in the trunk when you need it, it's perfect. It's... I would equate it something like, if you have a Chevy S10, this can probably fit just as much stuff in it as that can. Let's go ahead and get this thing home and finish up the review. In the daily category, this gets a 4 out of 10. Mostly because it has many features that you need to drive a car, but not any that you really want. Not having a better radio, not having better AC. It is noisy inside the cabin, as you probably heard, along with kind of a harsh road drive. It's good for in-town driving and not so much highway driving. For the weekend category, I'd say it gets a 6, so we're not scoring too high. Basically, if you take this to a car show, everyone's going to crowd around it because they haven't seen one in 20 years. Also, if you leave it at a Walmart supercenter, you're going to have a hard time finding it with trucks and cars that are 2 to 3 times larger than it. It's kind of like when you pull up to an open spot to realize that there's only a motorcycle, except it's actually a Festiva. Something else to think about if you're going to own one of these cars. Pranksters like to break them. It is quite easy to lift up the rear of the car and move it in its own spot, but doing so will typically damage the rear fenders. Even with these small issues, the Ford Festiva still remains to be one of my favorite cars ever made. I hope you've enjoyed this Doug Demuro-esque style review, and if you could, please let me know how well I did and leave a comment below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. I suppose this is the part for the after credits scene. If you made it this far, I'd like to thank Doug Demuro for all the reviews that he does. This is more of an homage to him. I doubt he would ever get the chance or want to review a Ford Festiva, so I went ahead and I did it myself. It's not up to his standards, but this also isn't his video. Doug, if you ever do see this, thank you for what you do. I appreciate it, as well as the other millions of people that watch your content. As far as this little thing goes, I need to get it road legal. You'll see more of that on an upcoming episode of $1,000 Car Guy. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time. I didn't actually walk very far away. I'm just over here. Look, Doug, I even wore 2 shirts just like you do. It's hot as